My stepmother announced she was cutting me from Dad's will at the reading the lawyer. Started, "My name is Violet. I'm 28 years old. My whole life I was the one they called too sensitive. I was the troubled one, the one they had to send away so I could focus. It turns out, I was just the one who saw the truth. My stepmother spent 16 years trying to erase me. She tried to replace my mother, she tried to steal my father, and in the end, she tried to steal my future. She almost did it, but she made one big mistake. She thought my father was as blind as she was. She thought her performance was good enough. The mahogany boardroom of Harper & Co. Holdings smelled like old money and lies. It was my father's company, his building, his table. But for the last 10 years, it had been my stepmother's stage. I sat at the far end of the table, the one closest to the door. I always chose that seat. It made leaving easier. My hands were clamped together in my lap, my knuckles white. I was twisting a thin silver ring my mother had given me, a nervous habit I'd never managed to break. Cynthia, my stepmother, stood at the head of the table. She was in a black designer suit that probably cost more than my car. Her blonde hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect. She looked like a grieving widow, but her eyes were bright. They were excited. She was 54, but she fought hard to look 40. She was all sharp angles and smooth surfaces. Today, she had arranged her face into a mask of deep, dignified sorrow. It was a good performance. My father, Thomas Harper, had died a week ago. A fast, brutal heart attack that gave no one a chance to say goodbye. Not even me. Cynthia's lawyer, a thin man named Mr. Fields, sat to her right. He looked nervous. He kept shuffling his papers and avoiding my eyes. On my side of the table, near the middle, sat Richard. Richard Stone. He had been my father's lawyer and his oldest friend. He was a quiet, heavy-set man who always looked like he was carrying the world on his shoulders. He was the only person in the room I trusted. He just sat there, his hands folded on the table, watching, waiting. Before I tell you how everything flipped, how one sentence in a sterile lawyer's office destroyed her and saved me, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. The room was silent for a long time. The only sound was the muffled traffic from the street below and the quiet shuff-shuff-shuff of Mr. Fields's papers. Finally, Cynthia cleared her throat. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. "Thank you all for coming on such a short, difficult day," she said. Her voice was smooth, like cream, practiced. "I know Thomas would have wanted this over with quickly, for all our sakes." I stared at the wood grain on the table. I focused on a small knot in the veneer. I tried to just disappear. I knew what was coming. I had been preparing for it my whole life. Mr. Fields cleared his throat. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Thomas Harlan Harper. As his acting attorney, Before we begin," Cynthia cut in, her voice suddenly sharp, all business. The fake grief was gone. She placed her manicured hand on her lawyer's arm to silence him. Mr. Fields stopped, mid-sentence. He looked at her, confused. Cynthia stood up straighter. She gave me a look. It wasn't mean. It was worse. It was pity. The kind of pity you give something you're about to step on. "There's been a change," she said sweetly. "A final adjustment to the estate, which Thomas made just before he passed." Richard looked up. His eyes narrowed, just slightly. "I wanted to tell you this first, Violet," she said, addressing me directly. The whole room turned to look at me. I felt hot. I felt small. I know how emotional you can get. I wanted to spare you any confusion during the formal reading. I didn't say anything. I just kept twisting my ring. She took a breath like she was about to do something very brave. "In his final days, Thomas came to a difficult decision. He decided, for your own well-being, to remove you from the will." The words dropped like acid. Removed. Not disinherited. Removed. Like a stain. Like a mistake. I couldn't breathe. I knew she hated me. I knew she had spent years poisoning my father against me. But I never thought, not everything. Not my father. He wouldn't do that, would he? The room went completely silent. Mr. Fields was staring at Cynthia, his mouth slightly open. He clearly hadn't known this was part of the plan. "It was Mr. Harper's final request," Cynthia's lawyer said, finding his voice. He was reading from a script now, his eyes glued to a paper. He wished for his daughter, Violet, to be provided for by Mrs. Harper's discretion, but to have no formal claim on the estate or its holdings. at her discretion. My fate was in her hands. She had won. She had finally and completely erased me. I felt a cold, familiar numbness creep up my arms. This was it. The end of my life as a Harper. I was 28 years old and I was officially nothing. Cynthia smiled. A small, sad, satisfied smile. I, of course, will make sure you are taken care of, dear. We can find you a nice apartment. Something manageable? She was already dismissing me, pushing me out. And just like that, the room went silent again. The finality of it hung in the air, thick and choking, until Richard, Dad's oldest friend, cleared his throat. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. Actually, he said, looking directly at Cynthia, Mrs. Harper just triggered the contingency clause. Cynthia blinked. The smile froze on her face. Her head tilted like a confused bird. The what? That was the first time I ever saw a real, honest-to-God fear on her face. The erase began long before that day. It started when I was 12. My mother died when I was 10. Cancer. It was long, and it was awful, and it hollowed out our home. It hollowed out my father. My father, Thomas Harper, was a real estate tycoon. He built skyscrapers. He moved markets. He was a giant. But when my mother died, he just collapsed. For 2 years, it was just him and me in our huge, quiet house. We were like ghosts. We ate dinner in silence. I would do my homework at the big kitchen table while he stared at the wall. He was there, but he was gone. I missed my mom. But I think I missed my dad, who was still sitting right in front of me even more. Then Cynthia arrived. She was an art consultant. She was helping my father with a new building lobby. Then she was helping with dinner. Then she was just there. She wasn't the fairy tale evil stepmother. She didn't scream or lock me in closets. She was worse. She was the quiet kind. The one who smiles while she rewrites your life. Cynthia always called me sweetheart or dear in public, especially in front of my father. Violet, sweetheart, why don't you go play? The adults are talking. Thomas, darling, don't you think Violet looks a little pale? I'm worried about her. Behind closed doors, her voice was different. It wasn't mean. It was corrective, like I was a badly behaved pet. You're too emotional, Violet. It makes your father worry. That dress isn't appropriate for a Harper. Go change. Your mother's things are just gathering dust. It's unhealthy to hold on to the past. The first thing to go was my mother's piano. It was a beautiful Steinway grand that sat in the living room. My mother used to play it every single night. The house was empty without that music. One day I came home from school and it was gone. In its place was a sleek, modern glass sculpture. I ran to my father. I was crying. Where is it? Where's Mom's piano? Cynthia glided in, placing a hand on my dad's shoulder. We discussed this, Thomas. The room needed an update. It was so dreary. It's just a piano, Violet, my father said, his voice tired. He wouldn't even look at me. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. That became her motto for me. I made a scene when I found her moving my mother's clothes out of her closet. I made a scene when she painted my childhood bedroom a sterile, cold gray. I made a scene when she threw out photo albums because they were cluttering the shelves. Each time, I was the one who was wrong. I was hysterical. I was living in the past. I was making things difficult. My father, desperate for peace, desperate for the new, happy life Cynthia was promising him, just nodded. He stopped listening to me. It was easier. Cynthia was the voice that spoke for us all. By the time I was 15, I was officially the problem child. I was unstable. I was grieving improperly. That's when Cynthia convinced Dad to send me away. She needs help, Thomas. Real professional help. A new environment. To focus on herself. So I was sent to a boarding school in New England. One of those very expensive, very isolated places for troubled teens. I spent 3 years there. Then it was college. Then a job in another city. They paid for everything. The best schools, the best therapists. All of it designed to keep me at a distance. All of it to fix me. I came back when I was 28. My father, he was sick. His heart was weak. I came back to take care of him. But when I got home, I barely recognized him. He was thin. He was quiet. And his eyes, they were tired. So tired. Cynthia ran everything. The house, the staff, the nursing schedule. My father's life. Don't upset him, Violet. she would whisper to me in the hall. His heart can't take the stress. I was the stress. My presence. My questions. I tried to talk to him. I tried to sit with him alone. But she was always there, listening, smiling. That's enough for today, dear. Your father needs his rest. She had become the gatekeeper, and I was the stranger. I spent the last 6 months of my father's life in his house, but I never felt more alone. I didn't just lose my father last week. I lost him 16 years ago, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for me at all. We were back in the boardroom. The air was electric. Richard's words hung in the air. You just triggered the contingency clause. Cynthia's face was a mask of confusion. The what? She repeated. Her voice was sharp. This was not in her script. Don't be ridiculous, Richard, she snapped, trying to regain control. We're here to read the will. My husband's final will. She tapped her manicured finger on the papers her lawyer, Mr. Fields, was holding. But Richard didn't look at her. He looked at me. Then he looked at Mr. Fields. Mr. Fields, as a member of the bar, I must advise you that the document Mrs. Harper is referring to is not the primary will on file with this office. It's a more recent document, Cynthia said, her voice dripping with condescension. My husband dictated it himself. He was very clear at the end. He was worried about Violet. He knew she wasn't capable of managing. Well, anything. He wanted her protected. She looked at me with that awful fake sympathy. He loved you, Violet, but he was a realist. This was her performance of grief. This was her final act, to paint my father as a man who saw me as broken, and to paint herself as the loving protector. Her sister Janet was in the room now. I hadn't even noticed her come in. She was a paler, weaker version of Cynthia. She sat in a chair against the wall, twisting a damp tissue in her hands. She was here as Cynthia's audience, her backup. Richard Stone opened his briefcase. He didn't rush. Every movement was slow, deliberate. He took out a thick sealed envelope. Not the file Mr. Fields had. This one was heavy cream-colored cardstock, with my father's signature, Thomas Harper, written across the seal in black ink. This, Richard said, placing it on the table, is the official, notarized, and witnessed last will and testament of Thomas Harper, dated 3 years ago. It is the only valid will. Cynthia let out a small, sharp laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. Oh, Richard. You're mistaken. That one is old. Obsolete. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a single folded page. It was cheap, white-lined paper. The kind you tear from a spiral notebook. She slid it across the mahogany table. It looked ridiculous. This is his final request, she purred. He dictated it to me from his bed. He was too weak to write it all himself, but he signed it. I looked at the paper. At the bottom, there was a shaky, jagged signature that looked nothing like my father's. It was a child's scribble. My stomach turned. It was a forgery. A bad one. She hadn't even tried to make it look real. She was that arrogant. She believed everyone in this room was either on her payroll or too stupid to question her. A hot, sick feeling rose in my throat. All these years, I thought I was crazy. I thought I was too emotional, but I wasn't. I was right. She was exactly who I thought she was. She was a monster. Before I could stop myself, the words came out. They were quiet, but everyone heard them. That's not his handwriting. Cynthia's head snapped toward me. Her eyes were slits. The mask of the grieving widow was gone. This was the real Cynthia. Of course it is, dear. She smiled, her voice a poisonous whisper. Grief plays tricks on the memory. He was very, very sick. I was there. I held his hand. You weren't? The barb hit its mark. I flinched. I hadn't been there. She had made sure of it. She told me he was sleeping. She sent me on an errand to the pharmacy. By the time I got back, he was gone. This document, she said, turning back to Richard, supersedes your old file. My husband dictated it to me. His lawyer, Mr. Fields, was on the phone as a witness. Mr. Fields turned bright red. He looked at the floor. He hadn't been on the phone. He was lying for her. This is a fraud, I said. My voice was shaking, but I said it. He would never. And that is not his signature. Violet, please, Cynthia said, sighing, as if I were a child having a tantrum. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're embarrassing yourself. She looked at Richard. Now, if you're done with the dramatics, we will proceed with the correct will. Richard Stone didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the piece of notebook paper. He just calmly folded his hands on top of the real sealed will. Richard Stone looked at Cynthia. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard. He was done waiting. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice level. "By presenting an unsanctioned document and by attempting to supersede the validated will before its official reading." He paused. He reached for his laptop bag. He pulled out a slim silver laptop and placed it on the table. "You have triggered the contingency clause your husband installed 3 years ago. Protocol 7. Cynthia's smile vanished. Completely. Her face went blank. "What clause? What are you talking about? Thomas told me everything." "Clearly he did not," Richard said. He opened the laptop. He typed in a long, complex passcode. The laptop screen flickered, and then the large television screen on the boardroom wall, the one used for presentations, lit up. "What is this?" Cynthia demanded. Her voice was high-pitched, panicked. "This is outrageous! I am the executor. I am his widow." "You were his widow," Richard said, not looking at her. He was focused on the screen. "But your actions here today have just defined you as a hostile party." "Hostile?" she shrieked. Her sister Janet whimpered in the corner. "It's a video clause," Richard said simply. "Recorded by Mr. Harper in your presence, on April 9th, 3 years ago. You may remember it. It was the day you both came in to sign the primary will. I remembered that day." Cynthia had been furious. She had been in my father's study, screaming into the phone. "What do you mean, contingencies? I don't agree to this." I had thought she was arguing with a decorator. On the screen, a file folder icon appeared. It was labeled, "For Cynthia, in case of emergency." Richard clicked it. The screen went blue, then black, and then... My father appeared. My breath hitched. It was him. He wasn't the sick, frail man from the end. This was Dad. He was in his study at home. He was wearing his favorite blue cashmere sweater. He looked tired, yes. There were dark circles under his eyes. But his eyes were sharp. They were clear. They were the eyes I remembered from when I was a kid. The eyes that saw everything. He was looking right into the camera. He was looking right at us. Cynthia made a small choking sound. My father took a breath. And then he spoke. His voice filled the room strong and steady. "Hello, Cynthia." Cynthia staggered back a step. She grabbed the back of her chair to steady herself. "If you're watching this," my father continued, his voice calm, "it means you've done exactly what I feared. It means you've tried to change the will. It means you've tried to cut my daughter out." The color drained from Cynthia's face. "I mean it. All the blood, all the expensive foundation, all the color just left." She was gray. "You thought I was blind," my father said. He shook his head, a small, sad movement. "You thought I was weak. You thought I didn't see what you were doing." He leaned a little closer to the camera. "You see," he continued, "I know my wife, and I know my daughter." My father's voice filled the room. It was like a haunting. It was like salvation. I couldn't move. I just stared at his face on the screen. I was crying, but I didn't make a sound. The tears just rolled down my cheeks. He knew. He knew. "Cynthia," he said, and his voice was so sad. "I saw it all. I saw the small lies. I saw how you turned my staff against her. I saw how you isolated her. I saw how you convinced her and everyone else that she was unstable. I even saw you sell her mother's piano," Cynthia's lawyer. Mr. Fields was slowly backing away from the table, like he was trying to get out of the blast radius. "I allowed your manipulations," Dad said. "I played the part of the tired, blind old man. Do you know why?" Cynthia was shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no, Thomas, no." "I did it so Violet would see your character for herself. I did it so that when the time came, you would be exposed by your own greed. I couldn't just tell her. You had everyone fooled. I had to let you show her." He turned his gaze, and it felt like he was looking right at me, right into my soul. "Violet," he said, and his voice broke, just for a second. "You are not weak. You are not broken. You were just surrounded by vipers. You have your mother's heart, but you have my mind. You are my legacy, and I am so sorry I had to put you through this." He looked away from the camera, to someone off screen. "Richard," he said, his voice firm again. "If this video is playing, it means the trap is sprung. Cynthia has voided her own inheritance by her actions. Execute the secondary documents. Protocol 7 is in full effect." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was deafening. Cynthia was panting. Her perfect blonde hair was messy where she'd grabbed it. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. Richard calmly opened the sealed envelope with my father's actual signature. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. All Lydia had brought was still sitting there, looking pathetic. Like a child's lie next to an encyclopedia. "This," Richard said, tapping the real will, "is a rather straightforward document." Cynthia was still panting, her face pale and blotchy. Her lawyer, Mr. Fields, looked like he was about to be sick. He had shrunk into his expensive suit. "The primary bequest is simple," Richard continued, his voice calm and steady. He put on a pair of reading glasses, opened the will to the first page, and began to read. "I, Thomas Harlan Harper, being of sound mind and body." He skipped past the legal jargon, his finger running down the page. "Ah, here we are. Article 3, Division of Assets." He looked up over his glasses, first at Cynthia, then at me. "I bequeath 70% of my entire estate, including all properties, holdings, stocks, and liquid assets, to my daughter Violet Marie Harper." I stopped breathing. 70%. It wasn't the number. It wasn't the money. It was the proof. It was the opposite of removed. It was the loudest "I love you" he could have possibly given me. It was, "I trust you." It was, "You are my legacy." All the words from the video, made real, in black ink. My hands were shaking so hard I had to hide them under the table. Richard didn't pause. He just kept reading. "I bequeath the remaining 30% of my estate to my wife, Cynthia Harper." Cynthia's head snapped up. 30? Her voice was a low growl. 30? 30%, Richard confirmed, with a condition. "This bequest is contingent on the following: that she does not contest this will, that she does not challenge my daughter's executorship, and that she does not introduce any other document, written or verbal, claiming to be a more recent testament." He looked up at her. "Which, by presenting this fraudulent note," he flicked the notebook paper with his finger, "you did, just moments ago, in front of 3 witnesses." Cynthia stared at him, blank, uncomprehending. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," Richard said, turning the page, "we move to Article 4, the contingency." He read again. "Should my wife, Cynthia Harper, violate any of the conditions listed in Article 3, her 30% bequest is rendered null and void. It is to be folded back into the primary estate, to be managed by my daughter, Violet Marie Harper. Effective immediately." She had forfeited it all. In her greed to get 100%, she had lost 30. She had played her final hand and lost the entire game. I watched her face. I watched it cycle through confusion, then rage, then a cold, hard denial. "This won't stand," she hissed. "It's a joke." He was sick. He was manipulated. "I will fight this. I will drag you and this pathetic, unstable child through every court in this state." Mr. Fields, her lawyer, suddenly found his voice. He was trying to save himself. "That's right. We will contest. This document is clearly the result of undue influence. We will depose the staff, the nurses. We will prove he was not of sound mind." Richard Stone listened. He just waited calmly until they were both finished. He let the threats hang in the air. He let them echo. When they were done, he looked at Cynthia. "Are you finished?" Cynthia just breathed hard. Her nostrils flared. "Good," Richard said. He reached back into his briefcase. "Because it gets worse for you." He pulled out another file. This one was a thin black binder. He opened it and turned it around. It wasn't paper. It was a tablet, built into the binder. "My father had another video?" I whispered, shocked. "No," Richard said. "My father was a meticulous man. He was a builder. He knew that to have a strong building, you must have a perfect foundation. And he knew his foundation was cracked." He tapped the screen. The large television on the wall lit up again. But this wasn't my father's face. It was a spreadsheet. "Bank statements, logos, Credit Suisse. A small bank in the Cayman Islands. What is this?" Cynthia demanded, but her voice was weak. She knew what this was. "This," Richard said, "is what your husband spent the last 3 years tracking. Quietly, without your knowledge." He clicked a file. A list of wire transfers appeared. Dates, amounts, $50,000, $100,000, $75,000 over and over. From a Harper & Cupboard Holdings account, one I didn't even know existed, to a new account. A shell corporation. The Willow Creek Arts Fund. Richard read from the screen. An admirable name, except it doesn't fund any art. It funds a private account in Belize. Cynthia didn't say a word. She was frozen. My father found the first transfer 2 years ago, Richard explained, his voice still calm, like a professor giving a lecture. He thought it was an error, but then he found another, and another. He hired a forensic accounting team. They followed the money, he clicked again. A new document. A digital signature application. The Willow Creek Arts Fund. The name on the account wasn't Cynthia's, it was Janet's. Her sister Janet, who was still trying to be invisible in the corner, let out a sound. A small, terrified squeak. All eyes in the room turned to her. She was white as a sheet. The damp tissue in her hand was shredded. "Cynthia?" Janet whispered. "What is that? What's my name doing on there?" Cynthia's eyes were closed. She was cornered. That's a mistake," Cynthia said, opening her eyes. "They were dead." "It's not a mistake," Richard said. "It's embezzlement. It's wire fraud. It's theft. To the tune of $4.7 million. Money you've been siphoning from the company. Money you were planning to run with after you had secured the rest of the estate." He looked at Janet. His voice was kind, but firm. "Ma'am, I suggest you get a lawyer. Your name is on every single document. You are the sole signatory for this shell corporation." Janet stood up, her chair scraping on the floor. No, I didn't know. "Cynthia, you said it was for taxes. You said it was just temporary. You said it was a way to protect your assets. You promised me." "Shut up, Janet!" Cynthia screamed. The sound was ragged. "You promised me." Janet was crying now, big, ugly sobs. "You said it was just paperwork. You said Thomas knew all about it. You lied to me." "You used me?" The blood drained from Cynthia's face. She stared at her sister, her only ally, her weak, pathetic, stupid sister. And in that moment, Cynthia knew. It wasn't just the will. It wasn't just the 30%. It was everything. The entire room imploded. Janet was sobbing about prison. Mr. Fields was stammering about no prior knowledge and client privilege. And I just sat there. I watched the woman who had spent 16 years trying to convince me I was the crazy one, the broken one, be completely, finally, and beautifully exposed as the fraud she always was. My dad hadn't just left me money. He had left me the truth. There was a moment of perfect, terrible silence. Janet was gulping for air, her face a mess of running mascara. Mr. Fields was already on his cell phone, whispering frantically to, I assume, his own lawyer. And Cynthia? Cynthia was still. She was absolutely perfectly still. She looked at her sister. She looked at Richard. She looked at the screen with the bank statements. And then she looked at me. Her face, which had been gray with shock, slowly turned a deep, blotchy red. The veins in her neck stood out. Her perfectly manicled hands clenched into fists. She started to tremble. A low, guttural sound came from her throat. It wasn't a word. It was a noise. The noise of an animal. Then she moved. She didn't just stand. She lunged. She lunged across the table, scattering papers, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. Water flooded across the mahogany. "You!" she shrieked. Her face was inches from mine. It was a mask I had never seen. The smooth, beautiful, controlled Cynthia was gone. This was something raw, something hideous. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot. Spittle flew from her lips. "You did this! You nothing!" 2 security guards, who had been standing outside the door, burst in. They grabbed her arms. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." Cynthia fought them. She thrashed like a wild animal, her designer suit twisting. "Get your hands off me." "Do you know who I am?" She was still staring at me. Her fury was a physical thing. It was a heat I could feel on my skin. Richard stood up. "Mrs. Harper, I suggest you leave." "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her screaming. Everyone stopped. The guards froze. Cynthia froze, her arms still in their grip. She looked at me, confused. "No," I said again, louder. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I stood. "Let her speak. I want to hear it." The guards looked at Richard. Richard looked at me. He saw the look in my eyes. He nodded once. The guards loosened their grip, but they didn't let her go. Cynthia took a ragged breath. She straightened her jacket, a pathetic attempt to regain her dignity. Her eyes burned with a pure, white-hot fury. "You think you've won," she hissed. Her voice was trembling. "You think this performance," she spat the word, "changes anything? I kept this family respectable," she yelled, pointing at her own chest. "I hosted the parties. I raised the money. I built his reputation, while you hid. You hid behind your books and your feelings and your pity. You were a weight, a stone around his neck, and I had to carry you both." Every word was a slap. Every word was a confirmation of what I had always felt. That I was a burden. That I was in the way. But something was different now. The words still hurt. But they didn't land. They didn't sink into my skin like they used to. Because I had the video. I had the will. I had the truth. I watched her rage. I watched her twist and writhe. She was giving her final performance, and it was her most honest one. She was finally truly herself. She was right. I had hidden. I had been quiet. I had been sad. And in my quiet, I had watched. I let her finish. I let her scream until her voice was raw. The room was silent again, waiting. I met her gaze. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "You're right," I said softly. She blinked. She wasn't expecting that. "You did all of that," I said. "You hosted the parties. You built the stage. You made sure the spotlight was always on you." I took a step closer. The guards tensed, but I didn't care. "And that," I said, "is exactly why he left it all to me." She froze. "Because you never loved him," I said. The words just came. They were the truest thing I had ever said. You loved the life he gave you. You loved the name. You loved the attention. You loved the stage he built for you. I leaned in so only she could hear me. But you never, ever saw the man. You never saw him. And he saw everything. Cynthia's face crumpled. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. It was the horrible, dawning realization that she had been found out. That her entire life, her entire performance had been for nothing. She had been playing to an audience of one, and he had been watching a different show the entire time. She had no reply. There was nothing left to say. I had finally won. Not the money. Not the house. I had won the truth. The boardroom was a wreck. Water was dripping off the table onto the expensive carpet. Papers were scattered everywhere. Janet was still sobbing in the corner, a lost, pathetic little puddle of a person. Cynthia was silent. She just stood there, held by the guards, her face empty. The fight was gone. She was hollow. Richard Stone, ever the professional, just buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at me, then at Cynthia. "The reading is concluded," he said, his voice clipped and final. Mr. Fields, Cynthia's lawyer, who had been silent this whole time, finally stepped forward. He had composed himself. He was a lawyer and he had to try. "Richard, this is a travesty," he said, trying to sound outraged. "This video, these accusations of fraud. This is a clear case of an ailing man being coerced. We will appeal this. We will have this entire will thrown out." He looked at me. "We will prove in court that Miss Harper systematically poisoned her father against his loving wife." I tensed. Court. Fighting. Years of dragging my father's name, my mother's memory, through the mud. My stomach clenched. Maybe this wasn't over. Richard didn't even look at Mr. Fields. He just picked up his briefcase. "You can try," Richard said quietly. He snapped the briefcase shut. "But the FBI already has the file." The words hit the room with the force of a physical blow. Mr. Fields stopped. His mouth, which had been open to list more legal threats, just stayed open. What?" he stammered. "The file," Richard repeated, now looking directly at Mr. Fields. "The one with the wire transfers. The bank statements. The forensic accounting. The forged signature on the incorporation documents for the shell company." Mr. Harper was a very thorough man. He didn't want his daughter to have to fight. He sent a copy of the completed file to the U.S. Attorney's Office 6 weeks ago, with instructions for it to be opened in the event of his death. Richard looked at his watch. "I believe they are acting on it. Right about now." Mr. Fields turned a color I had never seen a human being turn. It was a sort of grayish-green. He grabbed his own briefcase, and, without a word to Cynthia, without even looking at her, he turned and walked quickly out of the room. He wasn't walking. He was running. Cynthia was alone. Her sister was a wreck. Her lawyer had abandoned her. Richard Stone looked at the security guards. "Please escort Mrs. Harper from the building." He then looked at Cynthia. His voice was cold. Not cruel, just factual. "Per Mr. Harper's instructions, the foundation assets and all company holdings will be transferred under Miss Violet Harper's control within 30 days. Mrs. Harper, you are required to vacate the primary residence within 14 days. You will be allowed to take your personal clothing and jewelry. Nothing else. A full inventory is already on file. You will be contacted by my office to arrange a time with a security escort to retrieve your items. 14 days. To pack up 16 years of a lie." Cynthia was completely, totally speechless for the first time in her life. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just let the guards turn her toward the door. She was a doll. A hollow, empty doll. She walked. She was still wearing her perfect suit, her perfect shoes. She looked like the powerful widow she had pretended to be, but as she reached the massive, polished wooden doors of the boardroom, her ankle twisted. Her designer heel, a thin 6-inch stiletto, caught on the edge of the marble threshold. There was a loud crack. The heel snapped. She stumbled hard. She would have fallen, but the guards caught her. She stood there for a second, lopsided, one foot flat, the other still perched on a broken, useless spike. It was a perfect, humiliating, final echo of her entire collapse. She didn't look back. They let her out, limping. The heavy doors clicked shut, and the silence that was left behind. It was the first real peace I had felt in 16 years. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 12 years old. I looked at Richard. He was watching me, his eyes soft. "He was very proud of you, Violet," he said quietly. He just had a very complicated way of showing it. I just nodded. I couldn't speak. I just stood in the wreckage of my old life, and for the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. A month later, I stood in the middle of the room, but it was a different room. It wasn't the dark, heavy mahogany boardroom that smelled of lies. This room was bright. It smelled of fresh white paint, lemon oil, and old canvas. The cold, modern glass sculptures were gone. The harsh, angular furniture was gone. All of Cynthia's updates had been packed up and donated. I stood in the newly renamed Harper Legacy Gallery. It had been my father's private gallery, the one attached to the house. Cynthia had always kept it locked. She called it morbid and stuffy. She'd been trying to sell off the collection for years, piece by piece, telling my father the insurance was too high. The fraud investigation had frozen all her assets. She and her sister were facing multiple federal charges. Their trial was set for the spring. I didn't plan on going. The house was another story. I couldn't stay there. It held too many ghosts. Richard had handled the sale. It was sold, contents and all, to a historical society. But they had let me take what mattered, which is why I was standing here, in the center of the main wall, where Cynthia once had a massive abstract, black and red painting that looked like an open wound. There was a new painting, an old one. It was my mother. It was her official portrait. She was in the garden in a blue dress holding a book. She was smiling. Not a big smile, just a small, quiet, knowing one. Cynthia had put it in storage 15 years ago. She told me it had been damaged by a water leak. I'd found it in the basement, perfectly preserved, wrapped in thick canvas. I had it professionally cleaned and restored. The colors were so bright. I hadn't remembered her eyes being so blue. I reached out and touched the glass frame. My reflection glimmered over her face. I saw her eyes in mine. I saw my father's stubborn chin in my own. For the first time in years, I felt him there. Not the CEO, not the tycoon, not Cynthia's tired, weak husband, my father. The man who taught me how to read. The man who held me when I fell off my bike. The man who saw his wife and his daughter being erased, and who quietly, patiently, meticulously planned one final, brilliant masterpiece. He hadn't just left me money. He hadn't just left me a company or a house. He'd left me proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I wasn't too emotional. Proof that I was right. He'd left me the truth, all wrapped up in a bow. He'd given me my past back. He'd restored my mother to her rightful place on the wall. And he'd given me a future. He'd left me proof that truth, even when it's buried for years, can still be uncovered. And when it is, it's beautiful. It becomes art. I looked at my mother's portrait and I finally understood. He hadn't been weak. He'd been waiting. He'd trusted me. He'd trusted me to be strong enough to see it through. And I still get letters from Cynthia's lawyers sometimes, the desperate, angry kind. I never reply. I just pass them to Richard. Her house, the one she'd bought with Janet using the stolen money, was seized by the feds and sold at auction. Her private foundation, the Willow Creek Arts Fund, was liquidated. Every dollar was returned to the company. Me? I'm keeping the gallery. I've reopened it as a nonprofit. It's a space for underfunded art students. Kids who have talent, but no one to give them a stage, because revenge doesn't have to scream. It doesn't have to be a big, dramatic explosion. Sometimes it just hangs quietly on a wall, framed in justice, signed in peace.